Nobody in that stadium could have predicted what was about to happen. Cristiano Ronaldo had just scored the winning goal. The crowd was still screaming his name, 70,000 voices rising into the floodlit night sky like something sacred, and somewhere in the upper tier, a 12-year-old boy named Dario was booing him. Loudly, furiously, standing up from his seat with his small fists clenched at his sides, booing with everything he had. The cameras caught it. Of course they did. In an era where every square inch of a stadium is monitored, analyzed, clipped, and disseminated, a child booing the greatest footballer alive was impossible to ignore. The clip spread within minutes. Millions of views. Thousands of comments. Hashtags trending across 3 continents before the match had even finished. Sports journalists wrote about it. Psychologists were quoted. Talk show hosts made jokes. And somewhere in his private locker room, drenched in sweat and still riding the electric high of victory, Cristiano Ronaldo saw it too. But what happened next, nobody saw coming. Not the journalists who had been covering Ronaldo for 20 years. Not the fans who believed they knew every facet of him. Not even the people closest to him, the inner circle who had walked beside him through championships and scandals and the grinding daily machinery of being the most recognized athlete on the planet. Because Ronaldo did not react the way everyone expected. He did not ignore it. He did not put out a statement through his publicist. He did not get angry or post something cryptic on social media. He did not move on. He asked his team to find that boy. But here is what nobody knew, and what changes everything about the story. Dario was 11 years old, almost 12, living in a small apartment on the outskirts of Madrid with his mother and younger sister. His father had left when he was 7. Not dramatically, not with a scene or a fight, but in the slow, quiet way that some men leave, becoming less present over months until one morning the space where he used to stand at the kitchen counter was simply empty and nobody talked about it much. Dario's mother worked 2 jobs. She was home by 7 most evenings, tired in the way that working mothers are tired, not just physically, but in some deeper register, as though the effort of keeping everything together required a constant background expenditure of something vital. Dario owned one football. It was worn down, slightly flat, the seams beginning to separate at one corner, the kind of ball that kids in wealthier neighborhoods would have thrown away 2 years ago. He played in the street after school because his mother could not afford the registration fees for a youth academy, and the municipal pitches in their neighborhood were either cracked concrete or so heavily booked by organized teams that a kid playing alone was lucky to get 20 minutes before someone bigger and louder claimed the space. He was good, really good, in the way that talent sometimes announces itself even without the infrastructure that usually surrounds it. His teachers noticed it. His neighbors noticed it. The older boys he occasionally played with noticed it and gave him the particular grudging respect that street footballers reserve for someone who earns their place without asking for it. But in a world that increasingly demands financial investment to cultivate athletic talent, academy fees, equipment, travel, private coaching, being good was never quite enough on its own. He had been saving for months. Coins collected from small errands, birthday money carefully set aside in an envelope under his mattress, a few euros earned washing a neighbor's car on cold Saturday mornings. His dream, the single concrete thing that kept him focused through nights when the apartment felt too small and the future felt too large and uncertain, was to attend a professional football match for the first time. Live. In a real stadium, not on a screen. A kind stranger from his building had made it possible. An older man, a retired teacher who had noticed Dario playing in the street for years and had one spare ticket to a match he could no longer attend himself. He pressed it into Dario's hand one afternoon without ceremony, just handed it over and said, quietly, enjoy it, as though it were a small thing.
It was not a small thing.
It was the first professional match Dario had ever watched live in his entire life. And in that match, on that evening, Cristiano Ronaldo had, from Dario's perspective, done something unforgivable. He had fouled Dario's hero. Now here is the part the internet never told you. The player Dario idolized was not Messi. It was not Neymar or Mbappe or any of the global superstars whose faces covered the walls of his bedroom. It was a young midfielder named Carlos Rios, a 22-year-old from the same neighborhood as Dario, literally the same narrow streets, who had grown up playing on the same cracked concrete courts, who had worn the same kind of worn-down boot, who had somehow, through a combination of talent and stubbornness that Dario had heard described in vivid detail by people who actually knew him, made it to a professional First Division team. For Dario, Carlos Rios was not just a footballer. He was not an icon or an idol in the way that distant famous people become icons. He was something more specific and more powerful than that. He was proof. He was proof that someone like Dario, from a place like theirs, speaking the particular language of that neighborhood's particular lack, could cross the invisible line,
Could stand on the other side.
could matter to the world in the way that the world had never suggested people like them could matter. When Ronaldo went in hard on a tackle, clean, perfectly legal, expertly timed, but fierce with the ferocity that world-class athletes bring to every contested ball, and Rios came off the pitch limping badly, clutching his ankle, his face contorted in a pain that was visible even from the upper tier where Dario was sitting. Something inside the boy broke open completely. Dario did not see a legal tackle. He saw his hero hurt. He saw the man responsible standing tall, arms slightly raised, expression calm, completely unaffected. He saw the referee wave play on. He saw 70,000 people react with noise that suggested they barely noticed. And that was when Dario stood up and started booing. The booing was not hatred.
It is important to understand that.
It was not malice. It was grief, the specific, disorienting grief of a child whose hope has been struck suddenly, unexpectedly, in a place he did not know he was vulnerable. It was the rage of someone who had almost nothing watching the man who had everything walk away without consequence, without apparent awareness, without even turning back to see what he had done. 12 years old, and already fluent in a kind of helplessness that most adults spend their whole lives trying to avoid. Ronaldo's security team located the boy through the stadium ticketing system within 48 hours. His name, his address, a phone number registered to his mother. When Ronaldo's personal assistant called that number on a Tuesday evening, Dario's mother was standing at the kitchen counter heating soup. She thought it was a prank. She held the phone away from her ear and looked at it the way people look at something they cannot quite process, the way you look at a word repeated so many times it briefly stops making sense. She almost hung up. She did not hang up. But here is what Ronaldo said when he finally spoke to her, and this is the part that nobody ever reported correctly, the part that changes what this story actually is. He did not call to lecture the boy. He did not call to have an adult conversation about respect or behavior or the importance of understanding a professional athlete's intentions before publicly responding to them. He did not call for an apology, and he did not call to demand one. He called because something in that 12-second video clip, something in the posture of that child, in the particular quality of that fury, in the way a small boy had stood up in a stadium and refused, absolutely refused, to be quiet about something that had hurt him, had reached through the noise of viral fame and touched something very old inside him. Something he had not thought about in years.
He had been that boy.
Not in the same circumstances. Ronaldo's story was its own specific architecture of poverty and ambition and sacrifice, built in a different place, in a different language, with different textures and different specific griefs. But the core of it, the rage of a child who feels the world is organized against him, who watches someone powerful and untouchable move through a moment that shatters everything you have carefully built your hope upon, that he understood with the kind of understanding that lives in the body rather than the mind. He remembered the feeling from Madeira, from the academy dormitory, from 100 moments in his early career when the gap between where he was and where he needed to be felt not just large but actively hostile. It had been a very, very long time since Cristiano Ronaldo had allowed himself to remember those moments. Success has a way of softening the past, of smoothing its edges into something more palatable and less raw. But sometimes something breaks through. Sometimes a 12-second clip of a child booing you cuts through everything else and finds you exactly where you are. He asked the mother one simple question. Would Dario like to meet him?
She said she would ask.
She walked into the small bedroom where Dario sat on the edge of his bed, coat still on from school, backpack still on his shoulder, carrying the particular weighted silence of a boy who had been internet famous for 3 days and did not entirely know what to do with that. she told him. And Dario, who had spent 72 hours defending his bullying to classmates and teachers and people in comment sections he was definitely too young to be reading, said nothing for a long time. He looked at the wall. He looked at the worn football in the corner of his room. He looked at the small poster of Carlos Rios he had printed at the library and taped up with 4 pieces of masking tape, slightly crooked, the way kids hang things when nobody is watching. Then he said yes. And here is where the story takes a turn that even the people in the room that day did not fully understand until much later. They met at a training facility outside the city on a Thursday morning in late autumn. The grass was still wet from overnight rain, and the air had that particular metallic cold that comes before the first proper freeze of the season. Dario arrived with his mother, wearing his best jeans and a jacket that was slightly too small for his growing frame. He had grown 3 centimeters in the past 4 months, and nothing quite fit right yet. He had his football under his arm, the flat, worn-down one. His mother had gently suggested buying him a new one for the occasion, had quietly set aside the money for it, but Dario had refused with a certainty that left no room for discussion. He did not want to arrive pretending to be something he was not. He was not sure he could have articulated that thought in those words, but he felt it with absolute clarity. Ronaldo was already on the pitch when they walked out through the tunnel. He was working through a passing drill with 2 members of his personal coaching staff. Easy, unhurried, the kind of repetitive technical work that elite athletes perform so automatically it becomes a form of meditation. His touch was precise and quiet. When he saw them appear at the mouth of the tunnel, he stopped mid-drill, handed the ball to his coach without looking at him, walked over across the damp grass, unhurried. He crouched down to Dario's level, not metaphorically, literally, bent his knees, lowered himself so that his eyes were exactly level with the boy's. Dario, who had spent 3 days imagining this meeting in various configurations ranging from terrifying to bizarre, had not imagined this. He had not imagined Ronaldo making himself small. And Ronaldo said, in accented but clear and careful Spanish, "Tell me about Carlos Rios." Dario blinked. He had prepared, in the anxious way that children prepare for things that frighten them, for a lot of different scenarios. An apology, maybe. A scolding that felt important enough to be delivered in person. A speech about respecting the game's greatest players, the kind of speech adults like to give when they have an audience. A photo opportunity smoothly engineered for maximum social media impact. He had not prepared for this. He had not prepared for Cristiano Ronaldo to crouch in the wet grass of a training pitch and look at him like he was someone whose answer would actually matter. He talked for almost 20 minutes. About Rios, about the neighborhood, about the cracked concrete courts and the flat ball and the academy fees his mother could not afford. About what it means, genuinely means, in the body, in the soul, to watch someone from your world cross into their world. The way it redraws the map of what is possible. The way one person's success becomes, for the people who share their specific geography of limitation, a kind of permission slip. Ronaldo listened without interrupting once. His expression was largely unreadable, jaw set, eyes focused, the trained composure of a man who has spent decades managing what he allows the world to see of him. But his eyes were doing something else entirely, because the thing nobody tells you about Cristiano Ronaldo, the thing that gets systematically buried under the accumulated weight of trophies and records and the smooth, relentless machinery of his global image, is that he is a man who carries his past like a stone in his chest. Not always visibly. Not in a way that interrupts the performance of invulnerability that his public life requires. But it is there. Always there. He grew up in Madeira, in a house so small that 4 children shared a single room, and the walls were thin enough to hear everything. His father, José Diniz, was a municipal gardener who struggled with alcoholism throughout Ronaldo's childhood, and who died in 2005, when Ronaldo was 20 years old and just beginning to understand what he might become. Too early to show his father the full shape of it. He was sent to the Sporting CP Academy on the Portuguese mainland when he was 12 years old, alone in a way that 12-year-olds should not be alone, in a dormitory full of older boys, in a city where his Madeiran accent made him the subject of jokes and imitations that he absorbed in silence because he had no other option. He was later diagnosed with a racing heart condition that required surgery before his career had properly begun, and he lay in a hospital bed at 15 wondering if it was already over. Every single step of his journey from that island to where he stands now is marked by someone, somewhere, telling him, in words or in silence or in the structure of a world that did not seem designed with him in mind, that he was not enough. Not yet. Maybe not ever. He knew what it was to be Dario. Not exactly. The specifics were different. But close enough. Close enough that sitting cross-legged on a damp training pitch on a Thursday morning in autumn, listening to a child map the geography of his hope and his rage, Ronaldo felt something loosen inside him that had been tight for a very long time. Something he had not even been aware he was holding. When Dario finished talking, there was a pause. A real one. Not the manufactured pause of a carefully managed moment, but the genuine stillness of two people sitting inside something true and not rushing to fill it. Then Ronaldo stood, picked up the worn football from where Dario had set it on the grass, turned it once in his hands, feeling the soft give where it had lost pressure, the roughness of the seam, and said simply, "Come on. Show me what you can do." What happened over the next 2 hours was not filmed. Ronaldo's team had strict, explicit instructions. No cameras, no phones, nothing. This was not content. This was not a moment for the audience. This was something else, something that existed only for the people inside it, and Ronaldo wanted it to stay that way. Dario played. And Ronaldo watched with the specific, concentrated attention of someone who has spent his entire life learning to see football at a level of resolution most people cannot access. He watched the first touch, quick, instinctive, slightly unorthodox in its angle, suggesting a player who had taught himself rather than been taught. He watched the left foot, noticeably stronger than the right, which was unusual and interesting. He watched the way the boy scanned the space around him before receiving the ball, a sophisticated spatial awareness that most 11-year-olds do not naturally possess, the kind that coaches spend years trying to teach. He watched the hunger, not the performed eagerness of a child trying to impress an audience, but the real kind, the unself-conscious kind, the kind that comes from having spent years playing alone or in informal games where nobody was watching, and the only reason to keep going was because you genuinely could not stop. After about 40 minutes, Ronaldo called his personal assistant over. They had a brief, quiet conversation. The assistant nodded and stepped away to make a call. Dario's mother, sitting in the small covered stand at the edge of the pitch with a coffee going cold in her hands, noticed none of this. She was watching her son run. She was watching him run on real grass, under proper floodlights, with professional coaching equipment and real goalposts, and the kind of space that kids from their neighborhood almost never access. The expression on her face was the kind that has no precise name in any language. It lived somewhere in the space between joy and grief, and a love so physical it was almost painful. When they stopped for water, Ronaldo sat beside Dario on the bench. Direct and simple, the way he asks everything, he said, "Do you want to try out for an academy?" Dario looked at him. "We cannot afford. That is not what I asked you." A pause. Dario turned the worn ball slowly in his hands. "Yes," he said finally. "More than anything. Here is what Cristiano Ronaldo did next, and why it mattered in ways that no headline could properly capture. He did not write a check. He did not announce a scholarship program at a press conference with cameras rolling. He did not call his publicist to discuss how this story could be positioned. He did not think about what this would do for his image because he was not thinking about his image. He was thinking about a boy with a flat ball and a ferocious, unpolished talent, and a mother who worked 2 jobs and had given up something of herself so quietly for so long that she had probably stopped noticing she was doing it. What he did was far simpler than a public gesture, and far more difficult than writing a check. He called in a personal favor. One specific favor from one specific person, a director of a youth development program he had known for 15 years, a man who had watched Ronaldo's career from close range and respected him in the particular way that people in football respect someone who has done it not just with talent but with will. He called him directly, no intermediary, and said, "I need you to look at a boy. Really look at him. Not as a favor to me. As a professional doing your job." The trial was arranged for the following week. In the days between the training session and the trial, something unexpected happened, the kind of thing that only occurs in real life, never in the constructed narratives people build around athletes and their gestures. Carlos Rios himself learned about Dario through a mutual contact. And Carlos Rios, whose ankle was still being monitored by the team physio, whose schedule was packed with rehabilitation sessions and video analysis and the ordinary difficult work of professional football, reached out to Dario's mother directly. He showed up unannounced one afternoon at their apartment, stood in the small kitchen while Dario's mother made tea with slightly trembling hands, and told Dario something that no platform, no caption, no carefully written statement could ever properly translate. He told him that when he was 11 years old, living 3 streets from where Dario lived now, he had gotten into a screaming argument with a security guard at a stadium because he did not have a ticket and refused to leave. He told him that the specific feeling Dario had described, that feeling of watching someone powerful and untouchable occupy a world that seems to have no room for you, he had carried that feeling for years. He told him it did not go away entirely. He told him that it was not supposed to go away entirely. He told him it could become fuel. Dario listened to all of this very carefully, the way he listened to things that mattered. Then, in the direct and slightly startling way that children sometimes ask the questions adults are too careful to ask, he looked at Rios and said, "Is your ankle okay?"
Heels low good.
It was a real laugh, surprised, warm, the kind that comes when something catches you off guard in the best possible way. It was the first time in a week that Dario had made someone laugh without intending to. The trial came on a gray Wednesday morning. And what happened there? In a way that nobody could have scripted and that resisted the tidy narrative arc of a motivational story, became the part that Ronaldo himself, months later, would describe as the moment he understood why the whole sequence of events had unfolded the way it did. Dario did not have a perfect trial. He was nervous, visibly, physically nervous, in the way that children are nervous when the stakes feel impossibly, almost unbearably high. He mistimed his first 3 touches in a row, which almost never happened to him. He overran a ball on his stronger left side. He went for a shot when the better option was clearly a pass to his left, and the shot sailed wide, and he stood there for a moment with his head tilted slightly down and his shoulders carrying the weight of it, in the posture that parents and coaches, and anyone who has ever cared about a child recognizes instantly, the posture of a child standing at the edge of deciding whether to cry. He did not cry. He turned around. He set his feet. He looked at the coach and said, quietly but without any trace of uncertainty, "Can I try that again?" And in the second half of the 90-minute session, something shifted in the way that things shift when a person stops trying to perform and starts simply being what they are. The nerves did not disappear, they transformed. They became something sharper and cleaner. His spatial reading of the game opened up. The left foot found its natural rhythm. He made 3 consecutive decisions in rapid succession, a one-touch pass, a quick turn, a perfectly weighted ball into space, that had 2 of the coaching staff exchanging a brief, private look. The youth academy director watched all of this from the sideline with his arms folded and his professional neutrality carefully maintained, the way experienced scouts maintain neutrality precisely because they know their enthusiasm can cause problems. He watched for the full 90 minutes. He said almost nothing. Then, at the end, he leaned slightly toward the colleague standing beside him and said 3 words in a low voice. "He has got it." Dario was offered a place in the academy's development program the following morning. The letter arrived by email, formal, signed, bearing the club's official crest. Dario's mother read it 3 times at the kitchen table before she called her sister. Then she sat there for a while, alone in the quiet of the apartment before the children woke up, and she cried. Not from sadness. From the specific, almost overwhelming relief of someone who has been holding tremendous tension in their body for years, the tension of managing everything alone, of making impossible calculations add up, of loving people fiercely while feeling insufficient to protect them, and has just been allowed, for a moment, to put it down. When she told Dario that afternoon, he nodded slowly, as though he were processing something large. He got up from the table, went to his room, came back carrying the old worn football. "Can I keep this one?" he asked. "Even when they give me new ones?"
"Yes," she said. "Of course you can."
He held it against his chest for a moment, the way he had held it in the stadium the night this all began. Outside, through the apartment walls, the city continued its indifferent life. traffic and distant voices and the ordinary percussion of a Tuesday afternoon. But inside that kitchen, between those two people, something had permanently shifted. 3 weeks later, a photo arrived through Ronaldo's assistant. Dario on a proper training pitch, in a real academy kit, the logo crisp on his chest, the colors bright against the
green.
His old flat ball tucked under one arm, a brand new one at his feet. On the back of the photo, because Dario had insisted on printing it and writing on it by hand, old-fashioned, the way his grandmother sent cards, 4 words in slightly uneven, careful handwriting. You listened.
Thank you.
Ronaldo looked at it for a long time. He set it on the desk in his private office, next to the trophies and the family photographs and the 1,000 other artifacts of a life lived at extraordinary volume and pressure and scrutiny. He did not post it. He did not show it to anyone. He did not mention it in any interview. He simply placed it there on the desk and left it. Some things are not for the world. Some things you keep. And sitting in the silence of that office, surrounded by the entire accumulated evidence of everything he had become, Cristiano Ronaldo sat with something that none of his records had ever quite managed to give him. Not the trophies. Not the titles. Not the golden boots or the sold-out stadiums or the billion followers or the legacy that journalists had already begun to write and rewrite in the breathless, comparative language of sporting mythology. Something simpler than all of that. Something that required nothing from anyone else and asked for nothing in return. The clean, clear feeling of having done something real. Not for the cameras. Not for the legacy. Not for the record books or the algorithm or the arc of a carefully managed public image. For a boy with a flat ball and a fury that came from love. Which, if you think about it carefully, is where every story worth telling actually begins.